In the winter of 1873, Milwaukee's German immigrant community whispered fearfully about 11-year-old Emma Richter. This pale, quiet girl could calculate the day of the week for any date in history within seconds, memorize entire conversations after hearing them just once, and recite the exact number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood. What modern science might recognize as an extraordinary neurological gift was, to the people of 1873, either a divine blessing or something far more sinister. When Emma began using her abilities to reveal buried secrets, predict deadly accidents, and recite intimate details of crimes no living person had witnessed, amazement quickly turned to terror. By spring, 3 men would be dead, a family would flee in the night, and Emma Richter herself would vanish without a trace, leaving only a leather journal filled with numbers no one dared to decode. Before we continue the chilling story of Emma Richter and the dark secrets her mind uncovered in Milwaukee's German Quarter, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring haunting historical mysteries every week. Let us know in the comments which city or state you're listening from. These stories unfolded in communities like yours, closer to home than you might think. The residents of Brewery Town did not realize that Emma's gift would expose a web of lies, betrayal, and murder hidden for nearly a decade, and that her mathematical precision would soon become their community's most terrifying nightmare. Milwaukee's German Quarter in 1873 was a bustling enclave of red breweries, modest wooden homes, and the constant hum of German and English voices mixing in the crisp Wisconsin air. Nearly 8,000 German immigrants had built their own little Bavaria along Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, bakeries, and the familiar rhythms of old world life transplanted to American soil. Men worked in breweries, Schlitz, Best, and dozens of smaller operations, while their wives tended gardens yielding the same vegetables their grandmothers had grown in the Rhineland. Hinrich and Greta Richter had arrived from Bavaria in 1861 with dreams of prosperity and their infant daughter Emma. Hinrich found steady work as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, a mid-sized operation supplying beer to the growing city, while Greta took in laundry and mending by candlelight. Long after Emma had been put to bed in their small but tidy home on Galena Street. The Richters were ordinary in every way except for their daughter. Emma had been born 3 weeks premature during the harsh Atlantic crossing, so tiny that the ship's doctor doubted she would survive. Yet she did, remaining slight and pale, with enormous gray eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. As a toddler, she rarely cried or demanded attention, content to sit quietly in corners, watching and listening as the adult world unfolded. By age 4, her parents noticed something unusual. She could recite entire conversations overheard days earlier, capturing every inflection and accent. She counted everything: the stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps from their door to the bakery, the precise intervals between brewery whistles. When Hinrich taught her basic arithmetic, she absorbed concepts with frightening speed, solving problems in her head faster than he could on paper. The German community greeted Emma's abilities with a mix of pride and unease. Old Mrs. Brennan, who claimed to remember witch trials from her grandmother's stories, crossed herself whenever Emma's calculating, gray eyes met hers. Father Koller, the stout Bavarian priest of their small Catholic parish, declared Emma's gifts a blessing, a child chosen to demonstrate divine wisdom. The winter of 1872 had been especially harsh. With temperatures dropping so low, Lake Michigan froze solid for the first time in a generation. Brewery workers huddled around coal stoves, their breath visible indoors, while their wives struggled to keep families warm and fed. It was during this isolated winter that Emma's abilities began to take a darker turn, though no one understood what was coming. She developed the habit of sitting by the kitchen window, watching neighbors with the same intense focus she applied to numbers. She began noticing patterns, not just in math, but in human behavior. Mr. Kruger always walked 247 steps to the brewery, except Wednesdays when he took a 284-step route. Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry in a specific order, but when her husband worked late, she changed it completely. These observations might have seemed like a child's quirks, except Emma began voicing them in ways that made adults increasingly uneasy. Curiosity shifted to dread on a gray February morning in 1873. Sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast, while her mother prepared her father's lunch, Emma suddenly looked up and announced, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 20 Hodriv," Emma announced. Greta nearly dropped the tin she was holding. "Emma, my child, what a terrible thing to say. Why would you think such a thing?" Emma's gray eyes remained fixed on her mother with that same unsettling intensity. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday, he drank 3 times his usual amount. His steps were uneven, 251 instead of his normal 244. When someone's pattern changes by more than 10%, something significant happens within 72 hours. Mr. Dietrich's pattern changed by 12%. The calculation is simple." Hinrich, pausing as he put on his heavy wool coat, stared at his daughter in disbelief. Jon Dietrich was indeed a drinker, but no more so than half the men in the German quarter. The thought that Emma had been counting his steps, tracking his drinking, and predicting his fate was disturbing enough, but her calm, mathematical certainty about his death sent a chill through both parents far colder than the Wisconsin winter. "You must not say such things, Emma," Hinrich said firmly. "It is not proper for a child to speak of death." Emma simply nodded and returned to her breakfast. Her parents exchanged worried glances over her bent head. They were used to her unusual observations, but this felt different, darker and far more precise than her usual mathematical proclamations. At precisely 14 minutes past 2 that afternoon, Jan Dietrich collapsed in the brewery's malt room. The official cause of death, heart failure brought on by chronic alcohol poisoning, according to Dr. Murr. The brewery workers noted that he had been acting strangely for weeks, drinking more heavily than usual, and showing signs of severe anxiety. But what truly unsettled them was the timing. Emma Richter's prediction had been accurate to the minute. Word of her grim prophecy spread through the German quarter like smoke from a chimney. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others remembered the pale girl with the calculating eyes and began to wonder what else she might have observed during her silent vigils. At the kitchen window, the Richter family became the subject of whispered conversations and sidelong glances whenever they walked to church or the market. Even Father Koller, who had once praised Emma's gifts as divine, now seemed uneasy. When Hinrich approached him after Sunday Mass, seeking guidance about his daughter's disturbing prediction, the priest's jovial demeanor had given way to concern. "Hinrich, my friend," Father Koller said, his Bavarian accent thick with worry, "perhaps it would be best if young Emma spent less time watching the neighbors and more time with her prayers. The Lord gives us gifts, yes, but sometimes the devil can twist even the most innocent abilities toward darker purposes." The suggestion troubled Hinrich deeply. A practical man, more concerned with brewing than faith, he nevertheless could not dismiss the unsettling accuracy of Emma's prediction. That evening, he sat his daughter down for a serious conversation. "Emma, you must tell me the truth. How did you know about Mr. Dietrich?" She looked at him with those enormous gray eyes, calm and analytical as always. "I watch, I count, I remember. Mr. Dietrich's behavior changed in predictable ways. When someone increases their alcohol consumption by 37% over 17 days, while reducing food intake by 20%, cardiac stress becomes inevitable. I calculated the most probable time of failure based on his age, weight, and observed symptoms." Hinrich felt his blood run cold. His 11-year-old daughter spoke like a physician, or something far more troubling. "But Emma, how could you know all these details about Mr. Dietrich's eating and drinking?" "I observe everything, Papa. Every day, every person, every pattern." Her voice remained matter of fact, yet something in her eyes made Hinrich deeply uncomfortable. "Would you like me to tell you about the other calculations I've made?" she asked. Hinrich shook his head quickly. He did not want to know what else his daughter had calculated about the lives and deaths of their neighbors. Yet as he tucked her into bed that night, he could not shake the feeling that his family stood on the edge of something far darker than a simple mathematical curiosity. Outside, the February snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the German quarter and creating an insulated world where secrets could hide and observations go unnoticed. Emma lay quietly in her narrow bed, her mind processing the day's data and calculating probabilities no 11-year-old should be able, or want, to comprehend. In the weeks following Jan Dietrich's death, the atmosphere in Milwaukee's German Quarter shifted like the wind off Lake Michigan. Emma continued her daily observations, but now her parents watched her with growing unease as she sat by the kitchen window, tracking neighbors with mechanical precision. The child who had once been their pride had become a source of deep, knowing worry. The brewing community was tight, knit by necessity. Men relied on each other for work, wives for companionship through long winters, and children played together in the narrow streets between red brick buildings. But Emma had never quite fit into this social fabric. While other children played games and told stories, she preferred to sit alone, counting, calculating, and watching the world with that unsettling intensity. Greta began to notice that Emma's observations were becoming more detailed and more disturbing. The child would casually mention that Mrs. Weber had been meeting secretly with Mr. Kellner behind the brewery every Tuesday afternoon for 6 weeks, or that the Schneiders were burying something in their back garden each Sunday after church. When Greta asked how Emma could possibly know such things, the girl simply explained that she had observed patterns and calculated probabilities. People think they are being secret, Emma said one March morning as she methodically buttered her bread, but they follow patterns just like numbers. Mrs. Weber always tells her husband she's visiting her sister on Tuesdays, but she takes 127 steps to Mr. Kellner's house instead of 349 to her sister's. The Schneiders bury objects wrapped in cloth exactly 73 centimeters apart in a grid. They believe no one is watching, but I am always watching. Heinrich had heard enough. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he spoke seriously with his wife. Greta, this cannot continue. Emma is becoming unnatural. Children should not observe such things, and they certainly should not speak of them so coldly. Greta nodded, her hands trembling as she mended one of Heinrich's work shirts. I'm frightened, she admitted. Not of Emma, Heinrich said, but of what people will think. Already the neighbors look at us strangely. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street yesterday when she saw me, and Father Collar hasn't visited since Jan's death. Their fears were justified. 3 days later, Emma made another chilling announcement. She was helping her mother prepare dinner when she suddenly stopped peeling potatoes, looking up with that familiar calculating expression. Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence. Greta dropped her paring knife.
Emma!
You must not say such things. But Emma spoke with the same mathematical certainty she applied to arithmetic. Mrs. Weber has been arriving at the brewery 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks. Mr. Kellner has been staying 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow, Mr. Weber will return from his delivery route 47 minutes early. His horse is developing lameness in her left front leg. I have observed her gait deteriorating for 11 days. The convergence of these 3 variables makes discovery inevitable. Heinrich, listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten. His daughter was not just observing neighbors, she was predicting their futures with terrifying precision. Emma, how do you know about Mr. Weber's horse? I count her steps when she passes our house. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, it was 68. Tomorrow, the lameness will be severe enough to slow the delivery route by 47 minutes, causing Mr. Weber to return early. The next day unfolded exactly as Emma had calculated. Wilhelm Weber discovered his wife Anna in a compromising position with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The confrontation left Kellner with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs, while Anna was beaten so severely that Dr. Mueller had to be summoned. The scandal rocked the tight-knit German community. Even more unsettling was the realization that little Emma Richter had somehow predicted the entire sequence of events. Word spread quickly. The pale girl with the mathematical mind had not only foreseen Jan Dietrich's death, but also the Weber-Kellner scandal with uncanny accuracy. The Richter family grew increasingly isolated. Former friends avoided them at church. Children were forbidden from playing near their house. Even shopkeepers in the German Quarter treated them with barely concealed suspicion. Heinrich's position at the brewery became precarious. Fellow workers eyed him warily, and Ernst Kellner, still recovering, made it clear the Richters were no longer welcome at company social events. Yet Emma seemed oblivious to the growing hostility. She continued her daily observations, her mind processing data and calculating probabilities with mechanical precision. She began keeping a leather journal, filling it with numbers, dates, and observations her parents dared not read, watching their 11-year-old daughter bent over her calculations, writing in neat columns, filled them with a nameless dread. As winter gave way to spring, the isolation deepened. The German quarter that had once felt like home now seemed hostile and threatening. Hinrich began to consider the unthinkable, leaving Milwaukee, abandoning the life they had built, and starting over somewhere far from the whispers, the fear, and the terrible accuracy of their daughter's predictions. But Emma was not finished. The worst was yet to come, and her mathematical mind had already begun processing the data that would uncover the darkest secrets of all. As April arrived, bringing tentative warmth after a brutal winter, Emma's journal grew thicker with her precise, unrelenting notations. The leather-bound book had become Emma's constant companion. She filled its pages with calculations that grew increasingly complex, far beyond simple arithmetic. Her parents glimpsed charts tracking human behavior, tables of numerical sequences they could not understand, and detailed maps of the German quarter, marked with symbols and measurements that made no sense to them. The community's fear of Emma began to manifest in concrete ways. Children were forbidden from walking past the Richter house. Shopkeepers served the family quickly, without conversation. Even Father Collar limited his interactions to formal church services. But Emma's isolation only sharpened her observational skills, as if the absence of normal social distractions allowed her unusual mind to focus entirely on the mathematical patterns of human behavior. Dr. Friedrich Müller, the community physician, had grown increasingly curious. Unlike the superstitious whispers of neighbors, he approached Emma's abilities with scientific interest. Having studied medicine in Berlin before immigrating to America, he had encountered unusual mental capabilities in his practice. When Hinrich Richter approached him privately for advice, Dr. Müller agreed to examine Emma. The examination took place on a rainy Thursday morning in Dr. Müller's office, above the pharmacy on Water Street. Emma answered his questions with the same mathematical precision she applied to everything else, her gray eyes fixed on some invisible calculation. "Emma," Müller said in his accented English, "your father tells me you can predict certain events. Can you explain how?" Emma met his gaze with her unsettling intensity. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on behavioral data. People believe their actions are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. With enough data points, I can predict future behavior with high accuracy." Dr. Müller leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Can you give me an example?" Emma flipped through her journal, pages filled with neat numerical notations. "Mrs. Brennan believes she is keeping a secret, but her pattern is obvious. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she walks to the church at exactly 30:15 p.m., but instead of entering for prayer, she continues to the rectory and remains for precisely 43 minutes. Father Kerr's pattern has also changed. He purchases extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have extended by an average of 17 minutes on those days. The correlation is statistically significant." Dr. Müller felt his breath catch. The implications of Emma's observations about the priest and the widow were scandalous, but the methodical precision of her documentation was even more troubling. "Emma, how long have you been watching people this way?" he asked. "Always," she replied simply. "Since I was very small. I only began making calculations when I learned mathematics. That is when the patterns became clear." After the examination, Dr. Müller spoke privately with Hinrich and Greta. His medical training convinced him that Emma's condition was neurological rather than supernatural, but he had no framework to fully understand it. "Your daughter's mind works differently from other children," he explained. "She processes information almost mechanically. In my opinion, this is a medical condition, not the things people whisper about." Even Dr. Müller's scientific perspective could not diminish the dread surrounding Emma's predictions. 2 days later, she made another chilling announcement. There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening. It will start at 1847, spreading to 3 adjacent buildings before the volunteer fire brigade can respond. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive. Hinrich felt the familiar chill of fear. Emma, you must not say such things. How could you possibly know about a fire? Emma consulted her journal. Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I observed him purchasing both in quantities exceeding normal household use. His wife left for Chicago yesterday, following the pattern of wives leaving before significant domestic incidents. The chimney on their house has structural damage, which I calculated from the angle of smoke emission and the soot pattern. Probability of fire 93%. Greta began to weep softly. The clinical way Emma discussed potential tragedy, as if human suffering were merely a mathematical problem, frightened her more than any supernatural explanation could. This was her child, yet she no longer recognized the cold precision in Emma's voice or the mechanical way she processed human pain. Hinrich made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hinrich decided to warn Franz Zimmerman about Emma's prediction, hoping that preventive action might save a life and perhaps prove that his daughter's calculations could be used for good rather than merely foretelling disaster. He found Zimmerman at the brewery on Saturday evening, stumbling drunk and reeking of the lamp oil Emma had mentioned. Hinrich's warning was met with belligerent laughter and crude jokes about the devil child who thought she knew everything. Still, something in Hinrich's desperation must have cut through the alcoholic haze, because Zimmerman eventually promised to be more careful with the lamps. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth and a dry wind blowing in from the west. At exactly 18:47 p.m., flames erupted from the Zimmerman house. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming not only the original building but 3 adjacent homes, before the volunteer fire brigade could mount an effective response. Franz Zimmerman's body was found in his kitchen, where he had apparently fallen while trying to fight flames already far beyond his control. The accuracy of Emma's prediction, to the exact minute, sent shockwaves through the German quarter. Hinrich's attempt to warn Zimmerman had been witnessed by several brewery workers, and word spread quickly that Emma had foretold not only the fire, but its precise timing and deadly outcome. The community's unease hardened into open fear, and the Richter family found themselves completely ostracized. For Emma, however, the fire was simply another data point. She recorded the correlation between her prediction and the actual event in her journal, adjusted her calculations based on observed variables, and began processing new patterns with the same mechanical precision that had made the prediction possible. The most troubling part was that she was not finished calculating. In the days following the Zimmerman fire, the German quarter became a place of whispered fears and sidelong glances. Emma's prediction had been too precise to dismiss as coincidence. 3 families, the Bronners, the Kohles, and the Steiners, had lost their homes, and the community struggled to house the displaced while grappling with the unsettling reality of Emma's mathematical prophecies. Hinrich soon found his position at the brewery untenable. Fellow workers avoided him, conversations fell silent when he entered a room, and Ernst Kellner, still bearing the marks of Wilhelm Weber's attack, made it clear that the Richter family was no longer welcome at any brewery social functions. Emma's predictions had transformed her from a curiosity into something the community feared to name. Emma herself seemed unaware of the hostility surrounding her. She continued her daily observations, filling page after page of her leather journal with calculations that grew increasingly complex and disturbing. She began creating what appeared to be probability matrices, tracking multiple variables at once and projecting outcomes weeks into the future. Greta grew afraid to look at the journal, terrified of what Emma might be calculating about their neighbors or their own family. The child who had once been Greta's greatest joy became a source of constant anxiety. Emma's matter-of-fact discussions of human tragedy, her clinical observations of private behavior, and her mechanical processing of suffering that should have evoked emotion all suggested that something fundamental had been lost or damaged within her daughter's mind. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late April. Emma sat at her usual place by the kitchen window, watching the street with her familiar intensity, when she suddenly looked up at her mother. "Mama, something is wrong with the pattern today." Greta, preparing bread for baking, felt her hands begin to tremble. "What do you mean, Emma?" Emma opened her journal, flipping through pages of numerical notations with practiced efficiency. "For 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan has walked to the rectory every Tuesday at exactly 30:15. Today she left her house at 20:47 and walked toward the river instead. Her behavior indicates significant distress. Her step length decreased by 12%, and her breathing was irregular. This suggests she is planning something final." The clinical way Emma spoke of Mrs. Brennan's apparent suicidal intent filled Greta with horror. "Emma, you must not speak of such things. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never. The mathematical probability is 87%, Emma interrupted calmly. "People who dramatically alter established behavioral patterns while displaying physical signs of distress typically make irreversible decisions within 4 hours. Mrs. Brennan's pattern changed 43 minutes ago." The world seemed to tilt around Greta. The realization that her 11-year-old daughter was calmly predicting a neighbor's suicide with mathematical precision was more than she could bear. She dropped the dough and ran into the garden behind the house, where Henrik was preparing soil for spring planting, trying to find comfort in the ordinary. "Henrik, you must come quickly," she cried. "Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We have to do something." Henrik looked at his wife's terrified face and felt the familiar dread settle into his chest, the dread that had become their constant companion. They found Emma still seated by the window, calmly adding new notations to her journal, as if recording a laboratory result rather than predicting a human tragedy. "Emma," Henrik said gently, "tell me exactly what you observed about Mrs. Brennan." Emma looked up from her calculations. She deviated from her established Tuesday pattern by 28 minutes. Her physical indicators showed severe emotional distress. Based on historical data related to behavioral disruption, the probability of self-harm is 87%, with peak likelihood occurring between 5 and 7 this evening. Henrik made a decision born of desperation, and of his growing acceptance that Emma's calculations were not guesses. He left the house at once, following the route toward the river that Emma had identified. He found Margaret Brennan standing on the dock, where the fishing boats were tied, staring into the dark water with an expression of profound despair. "Mrs. Brennan." Henrik called softly, approaching carefully so as not to startle her. "Are you all right?" She turned toward him, her eyes swollen with tears. "Henrik, what are you doing here? I was concerned about you. You've seemed troubled lately." Her face crumpled. "I can't bear it anymore. The shame, the whispers, the knowledge that everyone knows about my weakness. Father Collar says it is sin, but I cannot help what I feel for him. Better to end it than live with this disgrace." Henrik felt a cold wave of horror. Emma's observations about Mrs. Brennan and Father Collar had been correct. The widow was indeed preparing to end her life, rather than face public scandal. For the next 2 hours, Henrik spoke with her by the river, convincing her that shame was not worth dying for, and that judgment, however cruel, would eventually fade. When he returned home that evening, he found Emma making final notes in her journal. Mrs. Brennan did not follow through with her plan, Emma stated clinically. The intervention altered the probability calculation. I will need to adjust my variables for future predictions involving third-party interference. Henrik stared at his daughter in disbelief. She had calculated a suicide attempt that had not yet occurred, and now she was treating his intervention as merely another variable. The realization that his 11-year-old daughter was not just predicting tragedy, but studying human suffering with scientific detachment, filled him with an unnamed horror. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Henrik and Greta made a decision that would change their lives forever. They could not remain in Milwaukee. Whatever Emma's abilities were, they had made life in the German quarter impossible. More troubling still was the growing realization that Emma was losing touch with the emotional reality of the tragedies she predicted. She was no longer reacting to suffering, only measuring it. They began making quiet plans to leave Wisconsin, hoping to find a place where Emma could live without being feared, and where her unusual mind might find a different path. But Emma was not finished calculating. As Heinrich lay awake, listening to the German quarter settle into sleep, he could not escape the feeling that his daughter's mind had uncovered secrets far darker than adultery or suicide attempts. The precision of her observations, the clinical tone with which she spoke of tragedy, and the increasing complexity of her calculations suggested she had been watching far more than anyone realized, and the most terrifying part was that she was still calculating. The revelation that would expose the darkest secret of Milwaukee's German quarter came on the first day of May, 1873. Emma had been filling her journal with increasingly elaborate charts, tracking the movements and behaviors of nearly every adult in the community. Her parents had already begun packing, hoping to leave before her next prediction destroyed more lives. That morning, as spring sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Emma looked up from her journal. "Papa," she said, her gray eyes fixed on him, "I need to show you something important. My calculations have revealed a pattern that explains everything." Heinrich, who had been dreading this moment for weeks, reluctantly sat across from her. Emma opened her journal to pages filled with detailed charts, maps, and numerical sequences that resembled the work of a trained investigator rather than an 11-year-old child. For 26 months, she began with calm precision. "I have been observing and recording the behavior of 43 adults in our community. At first, I believed the patterns were random, but systematic analysis revealed correlations consistent with organized criminal activity." Heinrich felt his blood run cold. "Emma, what are you saying?" She traced a column of figures with her finger. 7 men in our community meet secretly every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. I calculated their movement patterns based on deviations from normal behavior, timing inconsistencies in their stated activities, and physical evidence of their gatherings. Emma explained. She pointed to a detailed map of the German quarter, covered in symbols and precise measurements. "Mr. Steinberg tells his wife he works late on Wednesday nights, but he leaves the mill at exactly the same time as the other 6 men and walks to the brewery, using a route that avoids the main streets. This pattern has persisted for 26 months, with only 3 exceptions caused by illness or family emergencies." Heinrich stared at the map, recognizing the names Emma had marked: Wilhelm Weber, Franz Kellner, Ernst's brother Hans Zimmermann, Franz's cousin Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Margaret's late husband until 3 months ago, Gustav Wolf, and Hermann Kruger. "Emma, how could you possibly know about secret meetings?" he asked, voice tight with disbelief. "I observe everything, Papa," Emma said simply. "Every night, every movement, every deviation from established patterns." She turned to another page filled with numerical calculations. "But the meetings are not the most significant discovery. My calculations indicate these 7 men have been systematically stealing from the brewery, with estimated losses of approximately $47,000 over 26 months. Heinrich's hands began to tremble. That sum exceeded the lifetime earnings of most families in the German quarter. "How could you calculate such a thing?" he whispered. Emma's explanation was delivered with calm precision. "I noticed discrepancies between the reported beer production and the actual output. I calculated based on deliveries, ingredients purchased, and waste disposal. The difference indicated theft, but I needed to identify the perpetrators." She pointed to charts tracking the behavior of the 7 men. They all display consistent patterns of increased spending unrelated to their incomes. Mr. Weber purchased new furniture worth approximately $300. Mr. Steinberg sent packages to relatives in Germany, 12 of them too large for normal correspondence. The pattern is consistent across all 7 men. Heinrich realized he was looking at evidence of a criminal conspiracy, uncovered by his 11-year-old daughter through obsessive observation and mathematical analysis. Emma wasn't finished. The operation required inside knowledge of brewery security and access to financial records. "My calculations indicate that Ernst Kellner himself organized the theft ring." The revelation hit Heinrich like a physical blow. Ernst Kellner, the brewery owner, who had been gradually isolating their family, was the mastermind of a major theft operation involving 7 men from their own neighborhood. The precision of Emma's analysis, her mathematical certainty, and the detailed evidence she had compiled over months left Heinrich both incredulous and terrified. "These are serious accusations, Emma. Are you certain?" he asked. Emma consulted her journal one last time. "The mathematical probability is 96%. But Papa, there's more. Something that explains why Mr. Kellner has been trying to isolate our family. He knows I observe everything. 3 weeks ago, he came to our house twice at night, standing outside for 17 minutes each time, as if calculating whether I had discovered his secret. His behavior shows he suspects I know about the theft." The realization struck Heinrich with full force. Emma's abilities had not only uncovered a criminal conspiracy, they had made her a target. Powerful men would not hesitate to eliminate the one witness who could destroy them. Emma closed her journal and looked up at her father. "Papa, my calculations indicate we are in significant danger. Kellner and the others cannot allow me to continue observing. The probability of them taking action against our family is 84%, with peak likelihood within the next 72 hours. Heinrich understood immediately. Emma's prediction was no longer about fire, suicide, or adultery. It was about their survival. Her mathematical mind had revealed a truth that made remaining in Milwaukee impossible. That evening, he made a life-saving decision. Using the detailed evidence Emma had compiled, he approached Dr. Mueller under cover of darkness and shared everything. The physician, already disturbed by Emma's unusual abilities, examined the journal by lamplight. "Heinrich," he whispered, "if what Emma has calculated is true, this is the largest theft operation in Milwaukee's history. And if Kellner suspects she knows, your family is in mortal danger." Dr. Mueller agreed immediately to help them escape the city, recognizing that their lives depended on it. Using his medical connections, Dr. Mueller arranged an emergency job offer for Heinrich at a brewery in distant Minnesota, giving the family a legitimate reason for their sudden departure. That very night, before Emma's 72-hour prediction could come to pass, the Richter family loaded their few belongings into Dr. Mueller's wagon under the cover of darkness. As they prepared to leave, Emma made one final observation that would haunt Heinrich forever. "Papa," she said, her gray eyes fixed on him, "in approximately 6 months, the theft operation will be uncovered through other means. Mr. Kellner will face justice, but 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation. The mathematical probabilities are clear." Heinrich shuddered as he lifted his daughter into the wagon. Even while fleeing for their lives, Emma's mind was calculating the future consequences of the conspiracy she had exposed. And her prediction would prove true. By winter, a federal investigation would reveal the full extent of Kellner's theft ring. Ernst Kellner would be arrested and convicted, while 3 of his accomplices would die under circumstances never fully explained. On that dark May night of 1873, as the wagon rolled silently through the sleeping streets of Milwaukee's German Quarter, Heinrich could only marvel and tremble at how his daughter's extraordinary mathematical mind had both saved their lives and destroyed the only home they had ever known in America. The Richter family disappeared from Milwaukee in the early hours of May 2nd, leaving behind only whispered stories and unanswered questions. Dr. Mueller claimed they had received an emergency family summons to Bavaria, but no ship records could confirm their departure. In truth, the Richters had traveled to Minnesota, where Heinrich began work at a small brewery in New Ulm. Dr. Mueller swore to keep their location secret, understanding that Emma's abilities would always make her a target for those whose secrets she might uncover. In New Ulm, the family tried to rebuild. Heinrich settled into the familiar rhythm of brewery work, and Greta slowly restored the domestic routines disrupted by Emma's predictions. But Emma herself remained unchanged. Her mind continued to observe, calculate, and record human behavior with the same mechanical precision that had once made her feared and revered. For several months, Dr. Mueller corresponded with the family. He reported that Emma had begun working with a mathematics professor at a nearby college, Dr. Hermann Weiss, a fellow German immigrant fascinated by her abilities. Approaching her talents from a scientific perspective, he helped Emma channel her observational skills in ways that could be constructive rather than destructive. The most remarkable confirmation of her abilities came in November 1873, when Dr. Mueller received a letter from Hinrich containing Emma's final prediction about the Milwaukee theft operation. As she had calculated months before, federal investigators uncovered Ernst Kellner's conspiracy. Kellner was arrested and convicted for embezzling over $50,000 from multiple breweries. Wilhelm Weber, Kellner's primary accomplice, was found dead in his home under circumstances officially ruled suicide, but widely suspected to be foul play. Otto Steinberg and Hermann Kruger also died within weeks. Steinberg in what appeared to be a drunken accident, Kruger from a sudden heart attack displaying symptoms suspiciously similar to poisoning. Emma's mathematical analysis had been accurate in every detail, including her prediction that not all conspirators would survive the investigation. Even from hundreds of miles away, her calculations had proven precise and terrifying. Milwaukee's German quarter slowly recovered from the scandal and tragedy of 1873. The federal investigation brought unwanted attention, but also exposed corruption that had quietly undermined the community for years. Empty houses were filled by new families, and slowly, the neighborhood rebuilt itself on more honest foundations. Yet the story of Emma Richter, the pale girl with the calculating gray eyes who could predict death and uncover secrets through mathematics, became whispered folklore. Parents warned their children about the dangers of knowing too much, while adults quietly wondered what other hidden truths might lie behind the ordinary facades of their neighbors. Even Father Koller, who had once blessed Emma's abilities as divine, later confessed to Dr. Mueller that her precise predictions had shaken his faith in ways he could not explain. The priest had begun to wonder whether some knowledge was too dangerous for any human mind to possess, and whether Emma's extraordinary abilities were a blessing or a curse visited upon their community. Just when it seemed the horrors of Milwaukee's German quarter had peaked, the shadow of Emma Richter's story continued to loom. Dr. Mueller's final letter to the Richter family, written in the spring of 1874, nearly a year after their departure, offered both relief and lingering unease. He reported that the German quarter had largely returned to normal, but that Emma's tale persisted in whispered conversations among the older residents. More unsettling was a discovery from the federal investigation of the brewery theft. Emma's journal, which Hinrich had left with Dr. Mueller as evidence, contained calculations far beyond the immediate criminal conspiracy. She had been tracking and analyzing behavioral patterns across the entire German immigrant community, compiling detailed profiles of dozens of families, and predicting future events with astonishing precision. The sophistication of your daughter's methods is something even professional investigators might envy, Dr. Mueller wrote. But I confess I am grateful she is far from Milwaukee. The precision of her observations and the mathematical certainty of her predictions represent a knowledge too dangerous for any community to possess. The final historical record of Emma Richter appears in the New Ulm College Mathematics Department records of 1875. Professor Hermann Weiss noted that his special student demonstrated unprecedented abilities in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction, but that her family had chosen to relocate for personal reasons. After that entry, Emma disappeared from history as completely as she had vanished from Milwaukee on that dark night in May 1873. What became of the girl who could calculate human behavior with such precision remains unknown. Some historians suggest that families with children possessing extraordinary abilities intentionally maintained their anonymity, protecting themselves from both scientific exploitation and social persecution. Emma's story remains one of the rare documented cases where such abilities were recorded in sufficient detail to understand their scope and implications. Her life reminds us that the human mind is among our greatest enigmas, capable of developing extraordinary skills that challenge our understanding of intelligence, observation, and prediction. In 1873, Emma Richter's abilities were seen as either divine or demonic. Today, science offers plausible explanations. Conditions like savant syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, and unique neurological processing can create minds that perceive and calculate in ways that seem almost supernatural to the untrained observer. What do you think of Emma's story? Were all her secrets revealed, or did her abilities extend even further than history can tell? Share your thoughts below and tell us if you've ever encountered someone with similar extraordinary mental powers. If this tale captivated you, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Emma Richter's story reminds us that the most frightening truths are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for a mind capable of recognizing the patterns that everyone else overlooks. In a world where we assume our secrets are safe, Emma's remarkable calculations warn us that nothing is truly hidden, and that those who know how to observe and count can expose even the most carefully concealed human behaviors.